And I know that with Vince McMahon feeling more free to start popping up backstage at some of these shows and calling in rewrites, and it's very easy to say, oh, Vince McMahon, he's unofficially back in WWE creative, and whenever something bad happens, we can just blame him for it. He makes for a very easy scapegoat. I get it. I do it too, because there are times where it's very obvious that something was a Vince McMahon influenced decision. Triple H has said he takes suggestions from his father-in-law. They talk about creative. Sometimes it's very clear when those situations are. So it's very easy to just blame Vince for everything and give Triple H a pass. The truth is, the booking of the women's division in WWE has been worse since Triple H took over as the head of creative. Or at a minimum, it has not gotten any better. I'm not saying the division was on fire a year ago under Vince McMahon, but given the emphasis on the women in NXT all those years ago when Triple H was running the brand, and maybe it wasn't his idea, maybe it was Ryan Ward or other people who were writing, and Triple H took all the credit for it. But under his watch, when he was leading NXT was his baby, right? That women's division, they had this kind of like little boom period there. I wasn't expecting things to regress on his watch. And it feels like it absolutely has. He brought back the women's tag team titles after Vince McMahon put them on ice when Sasha and Naomi walked out. He brought them back 3 months later, and they feel as useless now as they did before. We just came out of WrestleMania with 2 excellent women's championship matches. Rhea Ripley against Charlotte, one of the best women's matches the company has ever put on. Some people confuse that for good booking. Good matches and good booking, those are 2 different things. Just because the ladies killed it at WrestleMania does not prove my point wrong. Those matches have nothing to do with the booking of the women's division. It is not an issue of talent at the top of the card. We know what Charlotte can do. We know what Bianca can do. And Rhea. And Asuka. Some of the others, they just haven't been very good. Somebody has to say it. Some of the matches that we have gotten on television, especially since WrestleMania, have been fucking terrible. But I don't think people doubted what Rhea and Charlotte and what Bianca and Asuka could do in the ring at WrestleMania. They had great matches in spite of the horrendous booking leading into those shows. Triple H is the one who booked the matches, but he also had to book 4 to 6 weeks of television leading up to it, and what he gave us was bad. It was not good. He brought back a bunch of names that either left or were released under Vince, people like Candice LeRae and Tegan Nox. Brought them back without much of an introduction or a reintroduction. This is something that AEW is guilty of also before the whataboutism starts. I've called Tony Khan out lots of times when it comes to their women's division. But Triple H should know better. We get Candice on TV. Nobody cares. Nobody has a reason to care. They start a story with her and Nikki Cross, and good on Triple H for ending that terrible, almost a superhero shit that she was doing. But they start this story where Nikki is stalking her. They got back to it this week. I forgot that it was even still happening. I saw Nikki Cross in the crowd in the front row watching Candice. I'm like, oh, this fucking story is still going on. I totally forgot about it. But Candice, goes out there. Her matches are ice cold. Nobody cares. And why should they? All we know about her is that she's Johnny Gargano's wife. And the fans barely care about Johnny Gargano. Not because he's not good, but because Tommaso Ciampa got hurt, and they probably had plans to put the 2 of them back together, so they've been on autopilot with Gargano ever since, and now he's hurt. So she's the wife of Johnny Gargano, and she's the Poison Pixie as well. We can't forget about that. She's the Poison Pixie, whatever the hell that means. Sounds like a heel name, the Poison Pixie, yet she's a babyface. Same thing with Emma. They brought Emma back after 5 years. They threw her on television like everybody is supposed to remember who she is, and what has she done? She's Madcap's girlfriend, who usually stays in the back before his matches. She's wrestled twice this year, both times in tag team matches. What's become clear to me is that a lot of these people that Triple H brought back were not meant to be pushed. They were meant to deepen the bench. But if you're going to use them to help get other people over, you still have to try to give them some credibility to start with. Lacey Evans is on her 3rd or 4th reboot by now. I've lost track. At some point, they'll realize that female Sergeant Slaughter over here is never going to work. Becky Lynch was one of the biggest stars in the entire company a few years ago. Now she's out there with Trish Stratus defending the tag team titles a few weeks ago, and it's like the crowd was giving them a moment of silence. A moment of silence for the WWE Women's Division. Bianca Belair has been the Raw Women's Champion for over a year, and she's in dire need of a Joker to her Batman. I mean, she doesn't have anybody. I think that could be Rhea Ripley one day when they end up on the same brand, but for now, that's going to be Charlotte Flair when Charlotte comes back. You know, Rhea also, coming out of this draft, they've got to start building some of these women up to be credible challengers. The rise of Rhea Ripley over the past year came mostly from the time she spent away from the women's division. I would attribute it all to the character work she put in with the Judgment Day and working with Dominic. There's a lesson to be learned there. More of an emphasis on character development. That is a combination of vignettes, which NXT does a good job of right now. They've shown they can do it on the main roster too. I mean, they tried with all the Lacey Evans vignettes. They had those great comic book ones they did when they first introduced Xia Li as the protector, and then a few weeks later she said that she didn't want to protect people anymore, and so that was the end of the gimmick. But we need to see more of that type of stuff, and at least a few interesting stories that don't all revolve around a championship. If you're not wrestling for a title in this division, they don't bother to put any thought into any of their stories. So not everything Triple H touches turns to gold. People need to stop pretending that it does. I'd rather have him in that spot than the alternative, but the booking of the women has been his biggest failure so far. And he can call up as many new faces in the draft as he wants to, but it's what he does with them that counts.